Hi guys, welcome back to the shop. We are in the middle of our rawhide backed cedar build. Here is our current state of affairs. We have our rawhide attached to the back of our bow. We've cleaned up the edges now and are ready to continue with the tillering process. So up to this point, all we have done is gotten a good even bend that would bring it to the string, and then so essentially brace height on a long string, and then backed with rawhide. So you can see that we did get some pretty decent reflex associated with that rawhide. So I'm pretty happy with that. We will, at this point, reestablish our knock point through the rawhide backing here, and again fit it with a long string and start working toward initial tiller. So guys, I've got it bending what I think is evenly. I think each limb is pretty much bending evenly. The one on the right, which is my top limb, is 2 inches longer than the one that's on the left, which is my bottom limb. Even when I get this strung, I think what I'm going to find is that top limb is a little more limber than the bottom. So I think ultimately I'm just going to be removing a little more material, the length of this particular limb, in order to bring it into tiller, but I'm not going to see that until I get it strung. So just as I suspected, you can see that top limb is bending way more than that bottom limb. So I've got some work to do, and as a matter of fact, I'm taking a lot of bend out in the outer third of this particular limb. So I've got a little bit of work to do in here, and quite a bit of work to do along the entire length of the lower limb. And I wanted to really kind of showcase how difficult it can be to identify that limb strength, because they were bending pretty evenly, but that long string really throws you off in terms of which limb is starting to show longer. Like, I was guessing that lower limb was a little stiffer, and once we get it to string height, it is clearly evident that it's not a little bit, or that top limb's not a little bit weaker. It is a lot weaker. So to give you an idea of the aggressive nature of a spoke shave, all right, so I went ahead and did a little work with the spoke shave, but this is all I took off. So you can see they're pretty, just a couple shaves. So I think I went down each side couple times and then kind of trued up the center and did a little bit of file work just to kind of take out the undulations that the spoke shave left. And we are right back in business. All right, so that was only on the lower limb. So I actually didn't remove anything on the upper because I felt like it might have been just getting strained a little too much and might have thrown my eye off, which it may have. So we're only strung to about 4.5 inches here, but on the tape, this lower limb at its widest gap is just at 5 inches. And the upper limb, its widest part of the gap, is just over 5 inches, about a string. We're like 5 inches to the front of the string here, 5 inches to the back of the string here, which is just about right where we want to be. All right, when I raised the brace height, I did have some issues going on with that inner third of the top limb, so I went ahead and took that down a smidge to get that top limb bending a little more evenly through its length, which has given me about, I want to say, 1/4 inch of positive tiller now on this upper limb. I'm going to call well enough, or leave well enough alone at this point, and go ahead and let this bow sit at brace height now. So brace height at its very lowest here is actually at 5.5 inches. I'm going to let it sit there for the next half hour and come back and see what I'm dealing with in terms of any kind of string follow that I'm incurring, as well as any new anomalies with the bend in the limb. No major changes in those limbs that I can really make out. I would say the most noticeable would be, and I think this probably had more to do with me trimming or doing some work on the limb right here, but we're sitting at about 6 inches on the widest gap on the upper limb, and we're more along the lines of 5.25 down here. So kind of like I mentioned, we got about 1/4 inch of positive tiller on that upper limb now, so pretty stable. I'm gonna unstring it right quick and just kind of see how much of that reflex that we have left. Here we are, just unstrung. So literally I unstrung it and put it in this vise right quick. It almost looks like we are almost down to dead flat. We're still showing some reflex in those limbs, so not too much strain, I would gather. Set down on the counter or on the desktop or the workbench here. We're probably 3/4 of an inch, 1/2 inch still set back. So we are preserving a fair amount of that reflex in so far, so that is a plus. We will at this point let her relax for maybe 10 or 15 minutes and get back into tillering this thing out. Well, this is never a good deal. Was working it on the Tillering tree, and here we go. I broke her. So trying to diagnose exactly what occurred here. It appears to me that this is a failure in tension. I'm certain. There was really no evidence of any compression failures starting to occur anywhere along this belly. Admittedly, the bend was pretty concentrated out into the limbs themselves and not much bend through probably the center third of this bow, which is really not its intended design if you're doing a long bow, a thin, long, like man height long bow. It should be bending right through that grip area, only enough to not take any kind of set or string follow. So since I spend a lot of time at the drawing board and I'm used to having to do these things over again, I went ahead and took the other half of the stave, that split, and got us back to where we were again, with the other half of that split off. So same setup pretty much. Difference being that this one actually is narrower. You probably noticed when I split it that it did not have nearly the width on it that the other half, this stave, had. So it's a little narrower, which is going to make hitting the draw weight a little tough. But nevertheless, this is part 2. You can see that in this instance, I was pretty good about ensuring that we've got a good even thickness right through the grip there. And as you see it lined up along the straight edge of the workbench here, that it does start bending immediately out of the grip. We still have that elliptical tiller going, so that is still in play. I've got the limbs pretty much evened up. We got a little positive tiller going on what would be the top limb here. But from here, I'm going to just continue the build as if I never broke the first one. Pay no attention to the fact that I forgot to taper the ends of my rawhide. Just you get done and unwrap everything and just, smack yourself on the forehead and think, what the heck was I failing to think about? So this will take a little bit of work, after the fact. Here we are, guys, about 20 minutes after unstringing. You can see that any kind of reflex we had is pretty much gone, but this guy is sitting darn near flat if you consider that the grip is kind of built up here. But we are pretty much zero string follow, which means we've taken about a 1/2 inch of set across those limbs. Now from here, a couple things that we want to make sure that we do. A couple processes. One, since cedar is such a soft bow wood, we really, for lack of a better way of saying it, have to baby it through the remainder of the construction process. We cannot have any bumps, nicks, or gouges in this belly. If we do, we certainly tempt the occurrence of any kind of crystals or compression fractures along there. The way that we are going to manage this is to really, we're going to discontinue the use of any blades for sure. So no more spoke shaves. Files, they really need to be a finer file. Not very aggressive, certainly no rasps, because if you take a rasp to this, it's going to gouge deeply into the wood. It's too soft for a rasp. Best bet at this point is to get everything smoothed up, and from here, work it with sandpaper. Now, once you start in on sandpaper, you definitely cannot have any kind of blades or scrapers come across this, or really kind of don't want to, because you start embedding little bits and pieces of the sandpaper grit in there until we get finer and finer and finer, start sanding some of that out. But it will kind of mess up your steel tools. So once we turn over to abrasives, that's kind of the place where we're going to stay with this, unless we want to use a file to go back and smooth some of that out. Next phase here for me, I'm going to get her strung up once again and get our tips all aligned. If there's any kind of twist, we'll take note, but I can already tell you, having strung it, that there really isn't any twist. I managed that as it was coming to the strings. So anytime it was favoring bending toward one side, I took the other side down and just evened it out as I came to string height or brace height. So here it is. The bow itself is pretty basically tapered in all directions, you know. So that's really kind of an English longbow type of trait. We might narrow just a little bit through the grip here in the finishing stages for our arrow pass area, and you might even be able to see just a little bit of a narrowing here, but nothing too drastic. As I got going along with this bow, I just could not rectify the fact that top limb was bending like a whopper in comparison to the bottom limb. Did not want to continue to just weaken and weaken and weaken the bottom limb, in addition to just losing weight altogether with the whole bow. This thing's already in danger of coming in way underweight. So I had a couple different options. If I wanted to keep the top limb longer than the bottom limb, I would take equal amounts off of either side. The way I laid this out, that top limb is actually 2 inches longer than the bottom. And as I'm holding it and cradling it in my hand, it's a little heavier on the top side of the bow. So I don't think I'm going to lose much in the way of balance by taking 1 inch off of the top limb alone. So just by taking 1 inch off of this top limb, which you see is I just came 1 inch lower and put in new nocks, and we'll cut this away. My top limb remains 1 inch longer than the bottom limb, and I can feel it in my hand as I'm pulling on it. I have restored some balance to this bow, where it was just all the strength was in the lower limb. It is now pulling evenly from both limbs. So I accomplished everything I needed there by putting that down one inch. And I would tell you, if you're building along and 2 inches is working, 2 inches longer on the top limb, just stick with it. right? There's no reason to change what isn't working, but in this instance for me, to gain some strength back into that upper limb without sacrificing balance in the hand, I went ahead and just took an inch off the top. And we'll continue tillering here. All right, guys, we're pulling to about 16 inches here. And I want to say that this is just about the same stage I was at when I broke the last one. I'm not seeing a lot of indication that I'm going to do the same here with this guy. But it is you know, slow and go right now. I'm making sure to really take my time and do any fine tillering that needs to be done. I think I've got a pretty good arc. I have been needing to tiller this newly shortened upper limb, and we were kind of stiff right in here, and we should be showing good bend in through this portion of the bow. So lower limb has just seemed to behave pretty much the whole way through. I am doing my tillering with a basically 50 grit paper and then a kind of aggressive metal file here. I don't know if you can make out how aggressive this thing is, but it's not got a heck of a, it's not super aggressive like something like this. This will never touch this bow. And that on the back side here is pretty aggressive as well. This is a Nicholson file here, just too aggressive. I've been using this to kind of work on shaping the profile a little bit, say around the grip, to kind of thin it down or get the rawhide back into shape. But this is what I've been using to tiller with, these two tools right here. So here we are on the tillering board, looking pretty good. I'm gonna go tug it a few times on the tree and just see how far I can pull it, and keep exercising it until I get to full draw. I am now pulling to about 23 inches and getting about 26 or 27 pounds out of this thing. So it is really going to struggle to make it to 40 at 28. But bending well. Okay, so I think I showed the arc in the last segment there, the last shot that I did. What I am doing now is I got a brand new sheet of 100 grit garnet paper. I've been working with 50 to do the tillering and stuff, but we've got a really good bend, and I just want to preserve that bend until there needs to be any changes. So up to now, I've not needed to make any. The bend continues to just go a little bit further and a little bit further, and I'm really taking my time, as I mentioned, exercising this particular bow because I don't want to break it like the last one. I think haste may have played a little bit of a role in that one breaking prematurely. So I'm taking my time running this guy out to full draw, really giving a lot of good exercises, lots of good pulls before I move on to the next couple inches. But I went to the 100 grit paper so that I could sand out any kind of mill marking or deep grooves that were put in by that 50 grit paper. I do not want any of my tooling marks or sanding marks or anything like that to manifest itself as a compression fracture. So that just opens the door for any kind of collapse on the belly. So we have a very smooth surface here. I've also taken out any mill marks on the edges and so forth. So this thing's pretty well sanded, and you guys, when you're dealing with cedar, it just doesn't take much to sand any marks out. That's why you can tiller it straight with sandpaper. Wood removal is very quick with this particular wood. You may notice too, I'm taking just about a 1/4 inch of string follow at my current draw. Okay, so 23 inches. It is still pretty straight, but it is taking a little bit of set, which is a good sign. I want it to take set, not break. The other bow never really showed much set, it just up and snapped. So that means this one is flexing and learning and doing what it's supposed to do to turn into a serviceable bow. So I'm now getting to 26 inches on the tillering tree out there, just exercising this guy incessantly. And I think, you know, unless you guys see something I don't, I'm getting pretty good bend through these limbs, and certainly a good bend right through the grip area here as well. So I am bending evenly, really along its length, and probably should try to get a little more out here into these outer limbs. This side actually kind of looks to be in a little better shape here. That's my lower limb. My upper limb kind of looks like I need to get a little more right out in here to kind of relieve some of what's going on in the belly, or at the grip. But every adjustment I make to tiller's costing me all kinds of weight. So this thing's just barely at 30 pounds at 26 inches. So we've made a very light bow, unfortunately. And the thickness of these limbs, I mean, you would not see the thickness and think that that is light by any means, but sure enough it is. It just keeps pulling a little further and not gaining a whole lot of poundage, which is good. That's what you want. You want very low stack at the end of the draw, which is where I'm at. Unfortunately, it's low stack at a very low draw weight. So after making some adjustments and continuing to pull to 26 inches, decided to go ahead and unstring this guy and let him relax just a little bit. And as you can see, there's really just not a lot of string follow in there. So that would indicate that we are good in terms of compression. As I look up and down these limbs, there are no compression fractures or anything that would suggest that we're struggling with any kind of compression issues. The back has stayed together up to this point, so I think my little more methodical trips to the tillering tree have paid off as far as not stressing it too far too fast. So here we are. I mean, I'm within 2 inches of 28 for draw length, and somehow I'm still trepidatious. I feel like every time I have this happen, it sets me back a little ways, confidence-wise. So I'm struggling with that just a little bit. But I'm going to go ahead and run out there, and we're just going to exercise this thing until it hits 28 inches. If it comes back in 2 pieces, it comes back in 2 pieces. But hopefully that won't be the case. So my apologies for all of the busyness in the background here, you guys. But I thought I'd bring you out just to see this thing draw length. The scale's kind of turning on us a little bit, so it's hard for you to read, I'm sure. But at 28 inches, which is where we're pulling now, it's right at 31 and a half pounds. We're going to call this a 30-pound bow at 28 inches. Not anywhere near where I was hoping to land with the initial outing here, but I knew with the second piece we were going to struggle with the dimensions to get a super high weight, well, not super high weight, but a hunting weight bow out of it. In any event, here you go. This is really how this should look. So this is a a cedar wood, split cedar fence rail backed with raw hide, and given a little bit more width and thickness, this could easily be hunting weight. So just a real good entry point, guys, for those of you that want to get started and give a try. The cost on this was minimal at best, I would say, in supplies.
I have the rawhide's going to cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $30, $30 or $40, but it'll back a lot of bows. I would tell you it would probably back at least 5 bows, if not 6, if you're careful about the way you process it. And it is, what, $10 for the rail. So if you split all that down, we're talking less than $15 in materials here. In a little bit of time, I mean, you could buy one piece of rawhide and a few rails and really practice up. You know, for very minimal cost, you could be breaking these left and right and do a lot of learning in the process. So I am going to cut this here. In the next video, we'll tweak out the tips and put a grip on there and finish sand and take care of the backing to take it down from its stubbly look to something real smooth and clean. You know, when we put a finish on this bow, it's going to be absolutely beautiful. Cedar just really pops when you put a seal on it. So thanks guys for joining me. Be sure to like and subscribe. I'll catch you next week.